What's going on, everybody? I am Paul Gallant, and you are watching the 710 Hawks mock draft featuring me and someone who knows way more about all the guys that we are going to potentially see drafted in just under 2 weeks during the 2020 NFL draft. He is Jake Heaps, former quarterback. Jake, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, what's going on, man? Are you ready to do this? You ready to
I'm
make some of
ready.
these selections?
I'll be honest, I've been ready for the draft for a long time. And especially with nothing going on right now, I would absolutely love to get started. So, the Seahawks' first pick, assuming they don't trade back, which we see from John Schneider a whole lot, is going to be pick number 27. So we're seeing everything go down to a Tagovailoa, to the Dolphins there, Justin Herbert to the Chargers. That's fairly interesting as things continue to go down. And at pick number 27, Jake Heaps is now John Schneider. He's on the clock. What are we doing, Jake?
Well, there's a couple different strategies that I think that we're going to go through. And I think, obviously, we'll see how this mock draft goes, and we'll see if we don't get fired after this draft. But we may go through this a couple different times and play it a couple different ways. But as I wrote behind me on my whiteboard here, I think there's some clear priorities here for the Seahawks in terms of what they need to address in the draft. And starting off with the top three priorities to me is without question, is looking at this is, and I'm going to go into this draft, Paul, you and I are going to go in this draft under the premise that the Seahawks have already selected or been able to sign in free agency a premier edge rusher. So they've already attained, re-signed Clowney, or they have traded for Unique Ngakoue, or they've signed Everson Griffin. Okay, so that is what we are going to set the stage for, because I think that's really what the Seahawks want ultimately. They don't want to draft one of these young guys at edge rusher and say, hey, in 2020 with a limited offseason, we are going to rely on a rookie who's not at the top of the charts to come and be our 10-sack guy. I think that is asking way too much. There's not enough depth on the edge to, try and take that kind of a gamble. So we're going to sign a veteran player on the edge. We're going to feel good about it. Hawks fans are going to be, thrilled going into the draft. So now, if you look at the way the roster is currently constructed, they only have Jarran Reed, Poona Ford, and Brian Monet under contract. To me, that sets the stage for them really eyeing a defensive tackle, a talented defensive tackle. Now, are we looking for a plugger, right? A guy who's just a pure run defender? Or are we looking for someone that is Jarran Reed-esque, who has a dynamic ability to get after the quarterback, can still stuff the run? I think that's ultimately what they're going to be looking for early on. The second thing that they'll be looking for, in my opinion, they need to be looking for offensive tackle help. One, to replace Dwayne Brown down the line, the future left tackle. Also, Brandon Shell and Cedric Ogbuehi, they signed those two guys. I'm not thrilled about them. I don't feel convinced that they're going to be your day one starter. So can I bring in a guy that's ultra talented, that can come in and compete with Brandon Shell, and ultimately, if he doesn't win the job, no pressure, you can have this player sit, grow, and develop with a limited offseason, still feel okay about it, knowing that they're going to be pushing to be a starter in 2021. So let's take a look here at our draft on our big board. Let's look at the defensive ends first, edge rushers. Let's just see if there's anybody dynamic still left on the board. Okay.
What do you think about Yetur Gross-Matos, who's a guy that has been discussed? And I know that would be someone that would be an edge rusher, not an interior defensive lineman like you had been talking about. And we are operating again under the assumption that they have brought somebody in to address the pass rush. Is someone like him at that 27 spot? He has been mocked by some draft analysts as going to the Seahawks there. Do you feel like that's the route to go, or would you go an entirely different route, Jake?
Yeah, that's a great question, because Yetur Gross-Matos is somebody that I think in this draft has that unique ability to get after the passer. And when you draft him, that's really what you're going to be assigning him to do. He is not a great run defender. He is purely a pass rusher that can hopefully develop into something more. So yes, he's intriguing he's a very intriguing prospect. I like him, but yet again, We have already signed. We have already been able to retain a pass rusher. It's not a direct need for us right now. So let's look at offensive tackle. Can we go to our big board? Can we find our can we look at who are the available offensive tackles in this draft right now?
And this is a draft that is supposedly loaded with offensive tackle depth. And that's helpful because, as you mentioned, Jake, Duane Brown is going to be 35 years old when the season starts. His birthday, I believe, is August 30th.
Yes.
He's been awesome. And he was incredible just getting back on the field for the playoffs coming off of a knee injury. Father Time catches up with all of us, though. And you want to have, at the very least, the next potential tackle in a tackle-loaded draft. If not, as you mentioned, someone that can actually start at right tackle that you, Jake, are going to feel a little bit better about.
Absolutely. And that's why we're looking at this right now. So right now you see on the big board here, they've got Isaiah Wilson from Georgia. He's a little bit more raw, huge body, 6'7", 330 pounds, pushing 340. He's not necessarily a guy that I'm going to want to take because I think he's just a little too raw right now. So we're going to look at the next two guys on the board that I have my eye on, which is Josh Jones out of Houston and Austin Jackson out of USC. Now, Josh Jones is a guy who I think is a player that is a little bit more put together in terms of being able to play and compete right away. He's athletic. He's great versus the pass. He's great as a pass protector. And what I love about him is that he's nasty in the run game. He is shown on film. He's got, dominant physical traits, and he's a downhill blocker, which is something that fits into Mike Solari's scheme. Now, the next guy is Austin Jackson. Austin Jackson is only 20 years old, and he screams in terms of future talent of a future All-Pro. And we talk about Duane Brown. He is very similar to Duane Brown when Duane Brown came out into the draft. And the one aspect that I'm concerned about Austin Jackson here is that he may be just a little too young, a little too raw to be able to start right away. But if I'm looking at this for the future, Austin Jackson might be the most intriguing prospect in terms of the tackle positions, okay? So before we make our decision, to me, it's down to Josh Jones, Austin Jackson. I love that these two guys are left on the board. Let's go to defensive tackle, and let's see if there's anybody on the defensive tackle side that we think might slip down farther, because that's also part of this too in the draft, is not just saying, I love this player, I love this player. It's saying
someone fall in your lap.
Yeah, can someone fall down even further? Okay, defensive tackle. Neville Gallimore, I really like him, a major disruptor in Oklahoma's defense. Ross Blacklock, he is more of a sure thing at defensive tackle. Daniel Jeremiah has him in his top 30 on his big board. Marlon Davidson, a guy who is a tweener in terms of a defensive end, defensive tackle out of Auburn, a guy who can really get after the passer and create some flexibility on your defensive line. Now, what I see left on the big board here for defensive tackle, I think that we will be able to see these players later in the second round when we're still picking. So I'm going to say, let's go with an offensive tackle. Okay. Let's secure our future and protect Russell Wilson, our $35 million investment. This will also go to the side of let Russ cook, right? If he can, if one of these two players, Josh Jones or Austin Jackson, can develop into a really nice starting right tackle immediately, well, guess what? You've got an all-pro, Pro Bowl caliber player in Duane Brown on the left side, and you've got a future star at your right tackle, and you've been able to secure and upgrade your edges. So,
do you think if you brought in Austin Jackson, I've always been a little concerned when coaches move offensive linemen from one side to the other. They'll tell you it's like writing with another hand if you get moved around too much. And we've seen this in the past with the Seahawks. We've seen some players get moved from position to position to position, and ultimately it didn't work out. If I'm not mistaken, the early years of Germain Ifedi, there was a little bit of that going on. With Austin Jackson, would you want to move him to the right, or do you want to have him sit behind Duane Brown maybe and learn?
I think this is the part of having luxury. This is an odd thing to say, but because of COVID-19, you don't have rookie minicamp. You don't have OTAs or mandatory minicamp. So you're going to be right away going into trying to learn the playbook virtually through the off season, and then you're going to go right into training camp. So for me, what I would say, hey, youngster, you're going to come in and you're going to try and learn. I want you to try and learn the right tackle position. If you don't breed out Brandon Shell, I'm okay with that because we have a guy in Brandon Shell that we've already secured. We've already been planning on him being our right tackle, and I just want you to continue to develop in 2021. I'm okay with that because of the uniqueness of this offseason. So I'm going to go ahead and select Austin Jackson.
Okay.
I love his upside. Again, I think he is a future All-Pro, and he gives you that same flexibility and dynamic ability to, one, be a great pass protector, and in the run game, get physical, but also be a factor in the screen game, get out on the edge. You see Dwayne Brown all the time. They do those pulls with him and get him out on corners and safeties and DBs. I think that will be a great fit for the Seahawks.
I think for the majority of Seahawk fans would be happy that in the first 3 picks, an offensive lineman is taken. And assuming, as we said at the very beginning of this, that they have addressed the pass rush needs with either a Jadeveon Clowney or a Yannick Ngakoue or a Everson Griffin, who's available in free agency. All right. I mean, check as far as probably the 2 biggest concerns. And I think that the best part about that, Jake, you can maybe do a little bit of extra tinkering, a little bit of experimenting, if you will, when you get later in the draft. You can take the best player available as opposed to forcing a pick for a guy at a position of need.
Yeah, absolutely. And so also, what did I say when we made this pick? Well, we knew that defensive tackle was going to be an area that we wanted to pick in. But I felt that some of those players that were at the top of that board may still be around here in the second round. So let's see if that gamble ended up panning out or if that ends up nipping us in the butt here. So let's look at the defensive tackle big board and see what we have available here. Now, also, we'll take a look at the receivers and running backs because I think these are 2 areas that the Seahawks are going to look at. And yes, I did say running back, Paul. Okay.
Hey, I'm with you on this, and I talked about it this morning. If you look at the Seahawks' uncertainty at running back, not just this year with Chris Carson coming off of the hip injury and with Rashad Penny coming off of a very serious knee injury, despite having a really good year last year, 5 yards a carry, I thought, when he was out there, especially against the Eagles, he looked good. But you also have to think about, okay, well, Chris Carson might be gone after this coming season. It's the last year of his contract. Are you going to sign him to an extension? Are you going to go crazy like we've seen some of these teams do with running backs over the last couple of seasons? He's probably not going to command that much because of the injuries that he's had. But you got to think about that position. So I'm with you here, Jake. I am very open to the idea of a running back, especially in the second round, if someone were to fall to them.
Yeah, and absolutely. And so that's somebody that you're going to have, that's a position that you're going to have to look at for all the reasons that you just said. So now I look at the interior defensive lineman. Unfortunately for us, this did not play in our favor because Ross Blacklock, a very good player on the interior, he got taken up. Marlon Davidson, a guy that I was very intrigued about, ended up getting taken. And I think one more player, our guy out of Oklahoma, Neville Gallimore, ended up being selected as well. But it's okay. Don't panic. We don't want to draft out of reaction, and we don't want to be in a position where we're just selecting someone out of pure panic, okay? I really like Davon Hamilton out of Ohio State. My one issue with him, you watch the film, he is a wrecker. He's a game wrecker. He's almost kind of like Jadeveon Clowney. He wrecks things, but he doesn't add statistics. He doesn't add great production. So that's always something that I'm curious about, but we need disruption in the interior. So that's someone that I really want to keep my eye on.
Okay.
And Raekwon Davis, he's another good player out of Alabama. Nick Saban. And right now, you want to go with known commodities that have played at a high level in the SEC. I don't want to take a gamble and try and get too cute here later on. Let's take a look at the receivers here, Paul.
Okay.
Let's look at the receiver big board and see how we do here. because I think right now there are a couple intriguing prospects here on the receiver big board. Okay, now what we have here, it's really kind of a flavor. What flavor do we want to go with? Do we want to go with another big-bodied outside receiver to complement DK Metcalf and keep Tyler Lockett in the slot? Do we want a gadget player like the 49ers had in Samuels? What exactly are we looking for? Paul, what ideally in your world, what would you want them to do?
Well, first I want to ask you this, Jake. When it comes to wide receivers, do you agree that when it comes to who you have at wide receivers, you sort of want to create a basketball team where you have a big guy for possession situations, you have a slot guy, you probably have a burner. The Seahawks do have some burners that maybe you don't think of as potentially being starters, but we've seen Dave Moore this past season against the Vikings score a long touchdown. And we also know that Philip Dorsett had that brilliant 40 time when he was coming out of Miami and can stretch the field. That's what the Colts wanted. That's what the Patriots wanted when they brought him in. So there's a position at wide receiver that I'm assuming the Seahawks don't have right now, but it seems like they got a slot guy. Seems like they got a possession guy, and it seems like they have a speed guy. So with the way that you just laid it out, and especially with having seen Deebo Samuel, who is the most terrifying player in the division that goes up against the Seahawks, at least in my opinion, I'm looking for that gadget guy. Why not follow the trends and try to do what the 49ers did? Because we all saw how those speed sweeps killed the Seahawks this past season.
It is very true, Paul. I'm with you on that. I think that adds another dynamic element to the offense. However, my counterpoint is going to be, I don't think that this offense for the Seahawks, it fits into their scheme, their style, and their personnel. And typically what they do with their offense is they like to attack the field vertically. That's obviously why they signed Philip Dorsett. However, I would like to have Philip Dorsett be a fourth receiver, replace Jerron Brown, David Moore, rather than have him be the third receiver. Okay. Now, if these young rookies can't step up in a limited offseason like DK Metcalf did with a full offseason, it's okay. That's why you brought in Philip Dorsett. You'd be fine with him being that third receiver. Now, there's a couple really intriguing names. KJ Hamler, who's at the top at Penn State, he's a slot receiver. I don't really think that there's a fit here. Tyler Lockett, you have John Ursua. I think they're pretty good in the slot. Okay. Now, Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State, he is a pure outside receiver, dynamic player with the ball in his hands. I think he can fit into both molds here in terms of being a good outside threat and also maybe being a guy that you can use in some of these jet sweep situations, reverses, and certainly they were open to doing it with DK Metcalf. Now, there's two other names that are really intriguing to me. Michael Pittman Jr. from USC, when you talk about a guy who is on the outside and is a pure receiver, a great understanding of how to run routes, high point the football, this is your guy. This is a very good, I would say, safe pick. Good football player. May have gotten overlooked in the draft, but you know, Pete, he loves his USC guys. He's going to take a hard look at Michael Pittman Jr. The final guy that I'm going to talk about is a very interesting situation here. Do you want to go for DK Metcalf 2.0 and try to create a freak show on the outside? If you're intrigued by that, a guy that I think fits that bill is Chase Claypool out of Notre Dame. 6'4", 238 pounds, ran a 4.4 40. This guy really does a great job in one-on-one situations, high points the ball, is a red zone target. And one of the other things that you'll love about Chase Claypool is he is downright nasty. I promise, go look at his YouTube film. He is out on the edge, bullying DBs in the run game, knocking them, putting them on their back. He's a fun player to watch. And also reminds me a little bit of Larry Fitzgerald, not in the skill set in terms of ball skills, but in the sense that there's a great controversy of what is he? Is he an outside receiver or is he a slot receiver? And if you're telling me that you see him as either or, that's great flexibility. And you can use him in a variety of ways. So to me, I'm really torn between Chase Claypool. Do I get caught up in the physical freakiness of Chase Claypool, or Brandon Ayuk. Okay.
Okay, that's
Now,
a good question. And with the Seahawks being at pick 59, but also having pick 64 right afterwards, Jake, how does that affect your line of thinking right here? Because you have 2 picks, 6 picks apart from one another. If you want to go for a guy right now, there's a chance he actually could be available a little bit later. So this is a really difficult situation to be in. I mean, it's great to have 2 picks, don't get me wrong, but you got to be careful. If there's a guy there and you think he might be able to let him slide a little bit, this is a difficult situation. You might just want to take the guy that you like the most at this spot.
No question about it. And I want to look at running back just real quick. We've talked an awful lot. This video is going to be a little longer than we were anticipating, but it's good. We're diving into the meat of this thing. So let's look at running back. Okay, so we have some really good, intriguing prospects. I think that there's some guys that will still be around later in the draft that I think will really fit into the equation. So let's go back. Defensive tackle, receiver. Now, for us, I think that there is one player at receiver that makes a ton of sense. Defensive tackle, it's a little bit of a push. So let's go and get the sure thing at receiver here. I'm going to go with Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State. I think that he is a guy that would fit really nicely into this system, add some versatility, and gives you a guy that is dangerous with the ball in his hands.
So 2 Pac-12 picks thus far. You get Jackson from USC at tackle, and now at wide receiver, you bring him in. So Brandon Ayuk. So now you get another pick just a little bit later. Is there anyone there, Jake, that you thought that maybe you could have had with that last pick, or are we going to have to go in a different direction here?
Let's go to defensive tackle because that's where we're going to pick. We are looking for a defensive tackle right now. I think that as we look at the defensive tackles, we are still in a good position. The guy that we were unsure about is still left on the board, but a great disruptor in Devon Hamilton. I really like this guy. I think this is a really good selection for the Seahawks. And when you talk about a disruptor, a guy who can add pass rush ability, he fits the bill for the Seahawks. So pairing him along with Jarran Reed, I think adds a little bit of versatility to your group.
And hopefully that will help open things up for Jarran Reed, who obviously did not have the kind of season production-wise that we were hoping for after a couple of seasons ago. He gets 10-plus sacks. So we will see how that potentially goes. But I like where we're at thus far. The Seahawks get a tackle for the future in Austin Jackson. They get a wide receiver in Brandon Ayuk. And then on the defensive line, they add some depth. A guy who's played at Ohio State, a guy who also is disruptive, as Jake has laid out. So it's a pretty good spot to be in. You hope that he will open up things for the rest of the pass rush. So now at pick 101, in the 3rd round, the Seahawks are again on the clock. We've addressed some needs. What's the next biggest need, Jake?
The next biggest need for the Seahawks, as we look at our picks, and again, we're not able to trade down, which I think that's going to be a part of the Seahawks strategy. It always is. But now we have round 3. We have 2 round 4s, and we've got a round 6 currently for the Seahawks right now. Okay.
Yep.
So we don't have much left to address some of these needs. All right. So what I want to do is let's look at the running backs, okay? Let's look at the running backs. We've been able to address defensive tackle, offensive tackle, receiver, and now let's look at our running back corner situation here, okay? So still some intriguing prospects, and I don't think we're done on our defensive line, by the way, Paul. We still need to add to our defensive line here,
okay.
So that's something to consider. Okay, so now we're looking at the big board here with running backs. We've got Eno Benjamin from the Pac-12, Arizona State, talented running back. But if I'm looking at this big board, there's 2 names that have always intrigued me the most, which is Zach Moss from Utah.
Heard his name a lot.
He was a tough, physical, downhill runner for Utah. And
that's
really
UW, yeah.
Their offense revolved around him. Another name that really intrigues me is A.J. Dillon out of Boston College.
He's a horse.
He is a horse. You pair him with Chris Carson, and that is a guy that I think you add to a very bruising running back group. And the thing about A.J. Dillon as well is that he adds a little more versatility than just being a downhill bruiser. I mean, this is a guy who ran a 4.5 40. So he's a 41 vertical jump. I mean, overall, just a great athlete. So I really like him. So let's go to the corner big board. I think I might hold out hope that we could get A.J. Dillon in the 4th round. So I think we might hold off on the running backs depending on what we have here with our corners. So right now we're kind of getting towards the bottom of the barrel in terms of corners. Now, one thing that you have to consider with your cornerback position, you already have Ugo Amadi as your nickel. Do you want to add competition there? With the addition of Quinton Dunbar, he can play both. He can play outside. He can play inside. He is a tremendous, tremendous corner. And so that's a guy that I would really take this cornerback position. What do I want? Do I want more competition on the outside? Do I want competition at the nickel position? There's a couple guys that really stand out to me. Javelin Geardry from Utah. He lit the combine on fire running a 4.3. Miles Bryant is a very intriguing name, a guy who I think is a very good player. But if you wanted to add length, there's a couple other names on the board here that we could take a look. I want to hold off on trying to add at the cornerback position. Let's look back on the defensive tackle position here real quick and see if there's any names, any prospects that we still think are worth our time. Inside, interior defensive lineman. Okay. So a name that really stands out to me, Paul, is Like Fotu out of Utah. So we took
a lot of Utah guys on defense. That was a mean defense last season.
It really, really was. And Fotu, what he would do is he would add a plugging element, a run-stopping element. So we've been so focused on the pass rush that we forgot that the Seahawks for 2 years in a row have been towards the bottom of the league in terms of stopping the run. They've been one of the worst defenses in terms of yards per rush on opposing offenses. Been over 4.5 yards a carry. That's atrocious. And so we need to solidify that a little bit more. So Fotu is definitely a guy that I'm considering here. Now, so we looked at defensive line, running back, corner. Mm-hmm. I want to take Fotu here at defensive tackle here, and I want to hope that at running back we still have A.J. Dillon left on the board here in the 4th round. So let's go ahead and let's take Fotu.
Okay. So you take Fotu, and as you mentioned, I want to address while we figure out what happens with the rest of the draft and moving on to the next pick. At cornerback, that's a difficult situation for the Seahawks, not necessarily because of what they did this offseason. Bringing in Quinton Dunbar, great. You have Shaquill Griffin. You hope that he takes another step forward. But both of those guys are essentially on one-year contracts. So I would imagine, Jake, that you would be focusing on the outside corner position because the assumption is Ugo Amadi is going to take a step forward. You're going to give him the opportunity to at least. Dunbar and Griffin are probably going to beat out Trey Flowers for those 2 starting cornerback spots. But you do want to probably have a backup plan. Say Shaquill Griffin or Quinton Dunbar play out of their minds this coming season and all of a sudden start looking for that lucrative long-term contract that maybe is out of your price range.
Yep, absolutely. And that's a great point because you do have to plan kind of for the future in this situation. And I think that that's something you really got to keep at the front of your mind. No question about it.
Pick 133. The Seahawks are back on the clock. Is A.J. Dillon still available? It looks like he is, Jake.
Awesome. So for us, we won in this situation. I think getting A.J. Dillon here in the 4th round is a great steal for us. It adds some depth to our position that is struggling for that right now. Chris Carson coming off a hip injury. Rashad Penny is a guy that he is going to be on the PUP list. You're not going to be able to see him until halfway through the year next year. And so taking A.J. Dillon, we can feel really good about that moving forward. And maybe we still add one more veteran guy, but you got Chris Carson, A.J. Dillon, and a young Travis Homer who played well at times last year. So I feel really good about this pick.
At what point in the draft, Jake, do you start? You obviously have a big board. And you look at the big board and you determine, okay, at a certain point, like we're going to prioritize one player over another. Is there a certain point where you stop thinking, okay, I'm going to stop waiting around for this guy, even though I think he might fall a little bit farther? I'm just going to take this guy here. Is there a certain round where teams tend to start picking just guys that they like as opposed to where they think that person's value is compared to what other teams see in them? Like, say someone like A.J. Dillon, you look at yourself and he was listed as 144 in this predictive board. You have pick 144, which the Seahawks are on the clock for right now. Do you take the guy that you like and not even think twice about waiting, or do you wait again around round 4?
Well, this is the point where you start trying to fill in other needs, special teams. Like you said, a guy who you think is an intriguing prospect that you don't think is going to be around later. And so you might be willing to take a little bit more risk here. Richard Sherman in the 5th round, right? A guy who is transitioning from receiver to corner. You don't know how that's going to play out for you, but you love the length and you love the fact that maybe, just maybe, with the right coaching, he fits into our scheme really well. So with that being said, I said that we've gotten our main priorities done, Paul. We feel really good about how our draft shaped up. We've got 2 defensive tackles, one that can add to our pass rush and overall disruptiveness, one who can help us get better in the run game. We got a super talented offensive tackle that we think is going to be the future for the Seattle Seahawks in Austin Jackson. We got a really dynamic receiver in Brandon Ayuk, who I think can be an immediate plug-and-play guy out on the edge. Got a really good feel for the game. And A.J. Dillon, another late-round addition for us that we think can really be a main contributor here in our scheme and our system. Okay, the last one, it leaves us down to corner, right? So corner is something where it's not necessarily a huge priority for us, but we'd love to add some depth here. Maybe we can take a look at some of these other positions that we weren't thinking about initially.
Okay.
And see if we can
special teams, corner, something like that. Gotcha. Okay.
Yep. So let's take a look, though. I'm curious to see what's on the edge. We can see here at our right here on our big board, we've got Nick Coe and Alton Robinson. Both of those 2 players on the edge are extremely interesting to me.
Syracuse guy, especially. Yeah.
Yeah. Nick Coe. Yeah. Good for you, Paulie.
Yeah.
Look, Nick Coe is a guy who's long, who's rangy. He would definitely be a guy that you're putting a little bit of gamble and risk on. But if you like his ability and his potential, he certainly has the length to be a very dynamic player, pass rusher in this league. Alton Robinson is a player who I think is physical. He's got some unique tools, and he's created some major disruption against some very good opponents in his career. So that might be somewhere, that might be a position that we definitely take a look at. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go with a little bit of a surprise here, Paul. And I'm going to select Alton Robinson from Syracuse.
Let's go. Let's go.
I think
helmet down.
I think Nick Coe, I did this just for you. I think Nick Coe is a really long, intriguing prospect, but Alton Robinson in the 4th round, I just really feel like he's got a better overall around game than Nick Coe does. And he could be a contributor really, really quickly. Now you've got a rotation of L.J. Collier, Rasheem Green, Alton Robinson, Benson Mayowa, Bruce Irvin, and let's just say a blue chip edge rusher, because we don't know who that's going to be. Now you've really added a unique, interesting group. So let's select Alton Robinson here.
Okay, so you bring in Alton Robinson. You have a project guy potentially on the edge. That's going to be difficult, but picking between a guy on the edge who's played in the ACC, coming off of a real down year. This might have been the worst ACC season I can remember. And the SEC, especially a guy playing in the SEC West, because you get a really good feel for how someone plays against the best of the best in that division. That's the most difficult division. I would argue in all of sports. You can make a case for the NFC West as well. So when it comes down to 2 guys like that, what is the decision-making process outside of, I just like this guy more than the other prospect?
Well, I think when you look at Alton Robinson, you try and factor in a couple of different things. One, Nick Coe, he's big, he's rangy, but he's a 4.89 guy. Alton Robinson came in at 6'3", 264 pounds, and ran a sub 4.6. So athleticism, you just think that there's a little bit more juice in his tank, a little bit more of a better get off that you can work with, and ultimately think that with the right coaching, despite that year that you talked about, that he can really be a productive player in our system. And once again, in the 4th round, we're not coming in and asking him to be a frontline major contributor, but a guy in your rotation that can come in pass rush situations and be a major disruptor. I really like the move here. Now, and the opportunity to capitalize on a guy that maybe everybody else was overlooking. Now,
6th round time. Pick number 214, Jake. We are on the clock with the Seahawks' final pick of the draft.
Let's add competition into our secondary. Let's look at the corners here.
Okay. Of these guys available, are there any that float your boat, Jake? Or are we at a point right now where a lot of the guys, even project guys that you want as competition, are off the board?
Yeah, right now you're definitely taking a guy that, you know, is definitely going to be a gamble, is going to be a project. But right now, that's okay. We feel all right about that scenario because we're not asking for this player to come in and take over Shaquille Griffin or Quentin Dunbar, for that matter, or Trey Flowers. So we're just kind of planning for the future here. So is there anybody on this list that really intrigues us? Now, when you get to these type of names, you're kind of getting in the weeds here. So there's nobody that's really going to stand out to the rest of the crowd and saying, oh, man, there's still a big-time name left on the board here, and, you know, let's go take that guy. So these are all project type of players here when we're all looking at it. Now,
okay,
let's look at safety here real quick, because we did cut Tedrick Thompson. Where does Delano Hill fit into all this? We really like Bradley McDougald, Marquise Blair, but again, just trying to add some competition to this group potentially. So when I look at this list right now of guys that are on the back end for the safety position, once again, it comes down to scouting. It comes down to there's nobody that's going to, right away from a name standpoint, really jump off the page to you. But one name that I think, hold on.
And I do like the idea, Jake, while you look for the guy, of competition at safety, in particular because we saw Marquise Blair on the field this past season, and he was pretty impressive in spots. Really violent, comes up to the football, knocks the football out of people's hands. I mean, he forced a fumble on Deebo Samuel, but for whatever reason, he wasn't getting more playing time. Now, Quandre Diggs, awesome this past season as safety for the Seahawks. And Bradley McDougald, he had a solid season himself, and he's been a pretty good starter. I was curious, though, as to why we didn't see more Marquise Blair. And I'm sure it has to do with something that maybe he's not doing in practice or during the week. So the idea of bringing in another safety to maybe light a fire under Marquise Blair's butt, I do like that idea.
Yeah. Hey, can we look and see if Chris Miller has been taken or selected? Safety from Baylor. He was a guy that I was hoping was going to be here at the end of this draft. A guy that really
is there.
He is physical. He's a guy who I think brings a lot of energy to the table, and a player that I think can contribute to special teams. So let's take that selection of Chris Miller.
Okay.
And I really like, rounding out this draft with a secondary player, a guy who kind of fits that Seahawk mold of being downhill, being physical, and being a part of a Baylor team and a Baylor defense that was pretty good at times. So I feel good about this draft, Paul. We addressed all of our major needs. We were able to solidify and add some more stability to our defensive tackle, our defensive line position. Really got another great weapon for Russell Wilson, some protection for him, and addressed a running back position that is surprisingly, in a bad position right now, even though you did have a former first-round pick of 2 years ago or last year of Rashad Penny. So feel pretty good about this draft, Paul. Guys that will help this team get to a Super Bowl in 2020.
I'm very excited looking at it. I am very excited to see this thing actually unfold, because who knows what John Schneider and Pete Carroll and company are going to do. Jake Heaps, Tom, Jake, and Stacy, which you can hear, of course, 12 to 3 right here on 710 ESPN Seattle. Jake has a show to do. Jakes, thanks so much for doing this, for taking us through the draft process and helping the Seahawks get better going into 2020, at least the theoretical Seahawks. I am merely Paul Gallant of Danny and Gallant. This was the 710 Hawks Mock Draft. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Wash your butts.